Hello everyone, it's Cleo here, and today we're going to be talking about the latest My Little Pony villain, Opaline, and who she is, where she comes from, what she wants and why, and most importantly, what her relationship was with Twilight Sparkle. Everyone wants so badly to see G5 make some sense within the G4 lore, as we have been reminded many times throughout the series so far that this is the same universe, even if it doesn't really feel like it sometimes. I think almost everyone feels like it's not really being delivered, so I'm going to try and fill in the blanks Make Your Mark has left behind. I know they might explain them in the future, but what's wrong with a bit of theorising? Here is what I think would be a really fun explanation for who Opaline is and why she is so hateful. Opaline could actually be Twilight's own flesh and blood, her granddaughter, or maybe even just her own daughter. It might sound crazy, but just think about it for a moment. She's an Alicorn, and from G4 we know there are only two ways to become one. Either be granted the rank by another Alicorn, or be born to one. Which pony in their right mind would grant Opaline the powers of an Alicorn? Well, since I'm going to answer that question with no one, we have to assume that she was born one. This idea is furthered by the fact that Opaline thinks that it's a birthright to be respected and worshipped just for being an Alicorn. It's possible that she would be this entitled if she had earned the status, but I feel it's more likely she was born this way. Of course, it's also possible she was born to another Alicorn rather than Twilight herself, but if that was the case, what would stop the presumably much more powerful and experienced Twilight from beating her fair and square and sealing her in stone or something similar to that? Well, a mother certainly wouldn't want to do such a thing. Even if a mother is forced to keep their wayward child away from them for their own safety, they still will not choose to harm them. The final reason for choosing this is because it would make Opaline just so much more interesting, and would so neatly tie everything together with G4. There's no way any of the other characters are old enough to have significant relationships with the G4 characters. So let's say Opaline was born after Twilight, of course, was made the lead ruler of Equestria, and after Twilight had already chosen her direct successor. For these reasons, Twilight never had time for her own foal. With a whole kingdom to run and a student to teach, her hooves were full and Opaline just had to be on the back burner. Moreover, Opaline wasn't really the princess of anything, despite being an Alicorn. So Opaline grew up largely alone, but also very spoiled, as you might expect with her mother being the most important pony in the known world. She was constantly in her mother's shadow without any way to prove whether or not she could live up to Twilight's legacy. Never receiving the recognition and attention she needed, the young princess's heart grew colder and colder. Over time, she became bitter and entitled. When people feel unimportant, they very often try to overcompensate their ego by telling themselves that they're actually more important than anyone else. This would actually be the beginning of a real narcissist. And growing up with overachieving parents and impossible expectations from the masses to live up to would certainly create someone with some issues. After, well, for want of a better term, she turned to the dark side. Opaline became a huge threat to all of Equestria when she went to war with Twilight in a bid to take over the world. This was all to prove that she not only was worthy of her mother's legacy, but she was actually greater than anyone else. Because she obviously wasn't strong enough to take on a whole kingdom by herself, she found an alternative way to gain power. Gathering an army for such an insane cause would be impossible, so she started harvesting dragon's fire as a magical power source to make herself stronger. The dragons didn't survive her experiments or her harvesting of their magic. This eventually led to their near extinction as seen in Make Your Mark. In the 6th episode of Make Your Mark, Misty explains to the other ponies that Twilight managed to seal off Opaline from the pony races with a sort of magical force field. This would also make sense as a non-violent solution to the problem her own child was presenting. The spell was impenetrable for Opaline, and after a while she was forced to admit defeat. At least until she found some way to take down the spell. Opaline, with her dark magic, created a magical castle to sustain herself over hundreds of years, keeping her alive artificially. What seemed to be the last of the dragons were killed in extracting all of their dragon fire to build the castle. Opaline knew she had lost, but couldn't bear to admit the failure to herself, so she plotted over the moons to take Equestria back for herself when the time was right. Because Opaline is kept alive by magical energy, she can't actually leave the castle after all these hundreds of years have passed, at least not any longer than for a brief moment. She will be able to leave the castle for longer periods of time, or even indefinitely, once she's absorbed more magic to be able to survive outside of the castle again. Since she couldn't risk leaving her castle for too long and dying, making all of her effort to rule Equestria utterly pointless, she started using magic spells and illusions to lure young ponies to her castle. Once successfully tempted out of their bubble, Opaline would kidnap these young ponies and use them as servants she could brainwash into doing her bidding. It would just be too much of a coincidence if she just so happened to have an evil servant when she was once again able to get past the magical barrier Twilight put up. So it would make more sense if she almost always had a servant at the ready for whenever the magical barrier broke. So this leaves Opaline, after an absurdly long time, finally able to enact her plan. She seems to have lost her mind after all these years, and has lost any ability to plan much, but should she find a way to get more power, she will be a much bigger threat. So, that leaves us with the question, what do you think will happen with Opaline's character? Do you think this is the direction her backstory will go in? It would definitely make sense of why Twilight didn't just imprison or kill her. Maybe she was just too strong, or Twilight didn't want to hurt her, or both. Also, it would very much make sense of why Opaline doesn't leave her castle if she literally just can't leave it. It also explains why Misty is there, and what happened to all of the dragons. More important than my ideas, I love reading all of your ideas, what you think happened, what you think to this theory, what are the holes in it, what ideas do you think work better, all of that, love to see it. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to give it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching!